How many people here are parents? How many of you ever talked to your children about peer pressure? How many of you have said, peer pressure is great, give in to it? I'm here to tell you that you should have said that, selectively, but you should have said it. We tend to think of peer pressure as purely a negative, but it's not just a negative, it's equally powerful when used for good. And we tend not to notice it. We notice it when our kids are having problems. We associate it with they're hanging out with a bad group. When our kids are not having problems, we say it's because we have great kids or because we've provided excellence in parenting. But the peer pressure is equally strong on the positive side. In my book, Join the Club, I write about how people are using peer pressure to solve problems that have not been successfully attacked by other means. Just to give you an example of what we're talking about, the most obvious case is Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a group of people who come together, all of them involved in the same goals, and they hold each other accountable and provide each other with support. Now, if you'd asked me a few years ago to talk about how peer pressure can be a force for good, I probably would have thought of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I might not have thought of anything else. But now that I have my little peer pressure glasses on, I see this phenomenon everywhere. And in the book, I look at it as a solution for a wide scope of problems, including helping people to improve their health, helping minority students to succeed in college calculus, combating poverty, fighting terrorism, and even bringing down dictators. So if I had to sum up the thesis of my book in a sentence, it would be this. Why do people change? They don't change because you give them new information. They're unlikely to change their behavior because they learn something new. They're unlikely to change their behavior because somebody scares them. The most effective way to persuade someone to change their behavior is through identification. By giving them a new peer group to belong to, people who are just like them and who are either seeking to make that change or who have already made it. Next. Thank you. I think we can all imagine, thank you, at a gut level how this works with issues of personal temptation, for example, alcoholism. But the uses of positive peer pressure are far broader. So what does this have to do with building sustainability and resilience? Well, as I understand it, your goals are several. You are, first of all, trying to get residents of your cities to adopt new habits. Second, you're trying to create a new social norm. So greener living and sustainable management simply become how things are done. Third, you're trying to create a social movement. And fourth, you're trying to achieve political change. Positive peer pressure can help you with all four of those things. I'm going to tell three brief stories of social transformation. In all these cases, people change their behavior using positive peer pressure to give themselves the confidence to change and to create a new social norm. As you listen, please keep in mind the important point that people are most likely to change when they're given a new identity. And that identification is most credible when it comes from someone who is just like me. The most powerful message is your peers are doing this. So let me start out with a program that began in the state of Florida in 1998. That year, teen smoking was astronomically high. A survey showed that more than 36% of all high school seniors were smokers, and no one knew what to do about it. The year before, the Washington Post had written a story about teen smoking with the headline, "Officials seek to cut a path through the haze of teen smoking. The bottom line, no one knows what works." They'd tried advertisements. Public health experts had tried advertising to teens, giving them information about the dangers of smoking, tried scaring teens, again, the dangers of smoking. None of that was effective. So the state of Florida did something unusual. Because of the new lawsuit that was happening against the tobacco companies, and Florida was one of the first states to do it, they did it separately, they got not only a pot of money, but a trove of documents that were opening up showing what was really going on inside the tobacco industry. And Florida, with that money, decided to hire an ad agency called Crispin, Porter & Boguski, which had no experience with public health, but did know how to market to teenagers. The guys from Crispin Porter sat down and said, let's think about this. Why is it that teenagers start to smoke? For a teen, a cigarette is not a delivery system for nicotine. It's a delivery system for rebellion. It's a way of telling your peers, I'm so cool, I don't even listen to what adults tell me at all. It's a way of showing that you are anti-authority, that you are autonomous, and that older people don't tell you what to do. Well, this was clearly why past messages hadn't worked. Teenagers know about the dangers of smoking. They knew about them in 1998 also. In fact, focus groups showed the teens overestimated the dangers of smoking. They thought it was even worse than it was. But that was part of the appeal for a teenager. So Crispin Porter's people said, what if we find a way to make not smoking a way to rebel as well? And we have all these interesting documents now, so let's use the tobacco companies as the focus for our rebellion. So they convened a teen tobacco summit. They invited 600 teenagers from all over Florida to a meeting, and they basically spent the weekend making advertisements, literally writing the scripts and filming them. Crispin Porter's people were there to help, but the teens did it themselves. And what they came up with were ads that, in one, they showed a group of girls making a prank phone call to a woman who had been an advertising executive on the Lucky Strike account. And the girls call and they say, can you tell me what's lucky about Lucky Strikes? And of course, the advertising executive on the other end has no clue what's going on. And the girl says, is it because I might live? Hang up. And this was put on television. Another ad, a bunch of kids got into a car and did a road trip to Richmond, Virginia, which was the headquarters of Philip Morris. And they stopped at the gate, and the camera rolling, they asked the guard, can we speak to the Marlboro man? And the guard, also clueless, said, oh, I'm sorry, you can't talk to him because he's dead. And in fact, the model who played the Marlboro man on TV had just died. Does anybody know what he died of?
Lung cancer.
Lung cancer. And they put this on TV. So this was now a new kind of TV campaign for anti-smoking. And they supplemented it with groups, with clubs that were formed in every county in Florida that were not against smoking, and they were not against smokers. Their message was simply, these guys are trying to manipulate you. Tell them what they can do with it. And so these kids would go out and do pranks. Like, for example, they would do die-ins. They'd go to a building that had some association with tobacco, and they would lie on the floor outside, and people would draw around them with chalk, like a crime scene. This is the kind of thing they would do. And it was hugely effective. It was the first time in history that anything had been effective against teen smoking. Over the next 2 years, Florida saw the single largest drop in teen smoking that the US had ever seen. Then, when a national campaign was begun with the money from the tobacco lawsuits, they adopted Florida's managers, Crispin Porter's staff, and the entire Florida ad campaign on a nationwide basis, and it became what you may be familiar with, the Truth Campaign, small t truth. And over the next 10 years, teen smoking was cut in half. So what can we learn from this? These guys turned traditional public health messaging upside down. And it's important for you because environmental messages have some of the same issues. Okay, so the first thing that they learned was that don't aim to provide information. I have nothing against information, it's fine, but that's not the focus of your message. The focus of your message is identification for behavior change, which is something completely different. In 1964, when the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health came out, public health establishment was overjoyed. Who could possibly want to smoke after this report came out, and now we know all about the dangers of smoking? Well, the answer is 1.15 billion people at the moment, about a fifth of the world. And so clearly, information is not the same thing as behavior change. People need a reason to apply information to themselves. Second, do not appeal to fear. Fear is paralyzing. And the more life and death the issue, the more paralyzing fear becomes. The tendency when faced with an overwhelming threat, and I think we all know what overwhelming threat you guys are concerned with, is to go home and go to sleep. it doesn't make you motivated to act. It turns you in the other direction because our brains cannot deal with this overwhelming fear. Third, abandon your expertise. The reason the public health campaigns had failed was not that the public health experts were amateur marketers. The problem was that they were professional public health experts. What that meant was they have no idea how ordinary people thought and felt. You cannot, once you learn something and become expert in it, go back in your mind and abandon that to the way ordinary people think. You just don't have any idea anymore. You have to leave the design to the people who are as much like your target audience as possible. Fourth, do not show how widespread the problem is. This is a tendency that all of us fall into. I've heard so many talks on diabetes, for example, where someone stands up and says, please, everybody look around to the person on this side of you and on this side of you. One of the three of you is going to get diabetes. Or ads, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they have ads aimed at teenagers saying alcohol is the #1 drug abused by teenagers. Well, all this does is make the social norm one of bad behavior. You don't want to normalize bad behavior. You want to marginalize it. So how many of you have heard of the work of Robert Cialdini? A lot of you. Okay, Cialdini is a social psychologist who writes about how to persuade people. And one of my favorite Cialdini stories is this. He was a professor at Arizona State University, which is home to the Petrified Forest National Park. And the park's biggest problem is that visitors steal its wood. About a ton of petrified wood every month goes into the pockets of tourists. And to prevent theft, park officials put up signs that said, your heritage is being vandalized every day by theft losses of petrified wood of 14 tons a year, mostly a small piece at a time. So Cialdini said that one of his graduate students was traveling to Arizona from California with his fiancée, and he described the fiancée as the world's most honest person. They visited the park on the way, and upon seeing these signs, the fiancée punched her boyfriend in the shoulder and said, "We better get ours now." So Cialdini says, what could turn this honest person into an environmental thief who would loot a national treasure? And he got permission from the park authorities to do an experiment. He and his colleagues scattered secretly marked pieces of petrified wood on pathways displaying two different signs. And one sign said, many past visitors have removed petrified wood from the park, changing the natural state of the petrified forest. And it had pictures of 3 people taking wood. The other sign simply said, so you're getting this already, please don't remove the petrified wood from the park in order to preserve the natural state of the petrified forest. This sign had a picture of one lone hand taking a piece of wood with the Ghostbusters circle and the line slashed through it. Bad, the don't symbol. So for the next 5 weeks, Cialdini and his team measured how much wood was stolen from the paths with both those signs on it. And they found that on the path marked with the sign that said many people were thieves, 5 times as much wood was stolen as on the other path. The signage was telling people that everyone was stealing. It made stealing wood the social norm. If you want to motivate people, don't tell them how much people are doing bad things. Tell them how much people are doing good things. Don't tell them how much people are polluting. Tell them how much people are conserving. So this social norm has multiple effects on conservation. Many of you, I'm sure, know about O-Power. Raise your hand if you know about O-Power. Everybody knows about O-Power. Okay, just in case you don't, I'll give you the three-sentence version. O-Power is a company that provides you with a bit of extra information along with your electric bills, which is how your consumption compares with that of your neighbors with houses of similar size and age and heating type. And if you're doing really well, you get 2 smiley faces. And if you're doing medium, you get a smiley face. And if you're in the worst 20%, you don't get a frowny face. You used to, but consumers didn't like that. But you're told how much your profligacy will cost you in dollars. And this means you have a great opportunity to save energy and money in the future. And very importantly, this report also gives you to-do tips. Most people in your area keep their air conditioning at 78 degrees, for example, and tips on how to reduce your energy consumption. Otpor says that households reduce their energy consumption an average of 2% within 3 months of receiving their first reports, and that this consumption continues to drop over time, and it is progressive. The households that consume the most energy have by far the biggest drop in consumption. So this system, Otpor, is now working in cities in 29 states and in 5 countries, in addition to the United States. So one interesting question about Otpor is that why doesn't hearing that your neighbors are doing better than you, why doesn't hearing that your neighbors are doing worse than you cause you to relax and say, oh, this is the social norm, I can use more electricity, which it doesn't, by the way. And it's not clear why this is true, but there's 2 possibilities. One is that the energy tips overcome that dragging down of the social norm to bad behavior. But the other thing is very interesting, which is that they used to, at the beginning, they saw this boomerang effect. But it went away after they started using smiley faces. That seemed to make the difference. People want to get a smiley face. So there's other possible uses for the Otpor model. Ian Ayres is a professor at Yale Law School who conducted one of the studies of Otpor, and he writes and blogs a lot about behavioral economics. And he suggests that schools, for example, could send reports to parents comparing their children's number of absences with that of other children. Your building doesn't compost, but 7 out of 10 buildings in your immediate area do compost. Your town has planted 25,000 trees. That's great, but a neighboring town of the same size has planted twice that. So comparing people to their peers works, and it works better the closer the peer group. Cialdini did another experiment where he fiddled with those little cards that you see in your hotel room saying, if you don't want to have your towels washed, please hang them up again. So the standard appeal to on these cards is to our concern for the environment. And the authors experimented with changes to the wording on these cards, and here's what they found. Guests who were told that most other guests reuse their towels were 26% more likely to reuse their towels than those who saw the standard message. Guests who saw that most other guests who stayed in that particular room had reused their towels were 33% more likely to reuse their towels than people who saw the standard message. Now, on the face of it, that makes no sense. Why should I feel any sense of kinship with the last person who slept in this bed? But it works. So with most things that we need to be nagged about, the nagging is much more effective if it comes in the form of information about what other people are doing. Once people know that that's the social norm, they do take steps to abide by it. So the focus of an effective behavior change message, I'm in the wrong order here. Focus on motivation, not information. Information is one thing. Behavior change is something completely different. They are not the same thing. Do not confuse them. Now, the Florida example, I'm sure many of you thinking, these are teenagers. All right? We all know how important peer pressure is to teenagers. And adults are surely not so easily manipulated. And that is partly true. You're supposed to be a dope when you're a teenager. That's part of the job of being an adolescent, and you're supposed to rebel against authority. The part of the brain that regulates judgment is one of the last parts of the brain to develop, which I'm sure will not come as a surprise to anyone who's a parent of a teenager. But as adults, we are also very susceptible to peer pressure. It's just that it's invisible because teenagers are still running around with different groups, trying them on. As adults, we tend to have found the peer group that we're comfortable with, and we've settled into it. So we don't think of it as peer pressure, because it's partly coming from us. But we are susceptible to peer pressure, just like teenagers. Just ask anyone in the advertising industry. For example, men are much more interested in buying a car when they see a beautiful blonde leaning on the car. Now, do we actually believe that this girl will come with this car? Sit in your passenger seat? No, but we do believe that this car will help me be the kind of guy who is so cool that I can get a girl like that. One of the most persuasive forms of advertising, which has long been used for liquor and cigarettes, is simply to show attractive people enjoying the product. This is a group we want to join, so use our product and you can be part of this attractive group of people. You'll notice that in every case that I've mentioned, the key to success is not just the message, it's also the messenger. This is the second way peer pressure is indispensable as a tool for behavior change. It is the way that you create identification. I want to briefly take us all the way across the world to a very small town in India called Jamkhed, a very poor area, but it's a place where a program has dramatically improved the health of the villages where it works. When I went to a meeting of community health workers in these villages and asked them what were the main problems that they saw in their village, their answers were diabetes, hypertension, and arthritis. In rural India, they did not have any of the more of the traditional diseases of poverty. They now had the diseases of the wealthy. So it might seem like we don't have much to learn from a program in rural India, but we do. This is a program that has greatly increased health levels in these villages. And it relies on training ordinary village women to be their village doctors. These are often the most downtrodden women in the village. They're members of the Dalit or untouchable caste. They're completely impoverished, most of them completely illiterate. Some of them are even former leprosy patients and have sort of mangled or maimed hands. So the program doesn't work in spite of the fact that these women are ordinary. It works because of the fact that these women are ordinary, for two reasons. First, even if you could get doctors or nurses to come to rural villages in India, which you can't, by the way, they're not very effective. Rural health does not depend on curative medicine, which is what doctors and nurses are accustomed to providing. It depends on prevention, on getting people to change their behavior. Purifying water, early breastfeeding, serving more nutritious foods to their children, cleaning up standing water so mosquitoes don't breed. Behavior change is the key to rural health. So the founders of this Jamkhed program are a married couple of Indian doctors named Raj and Maybelle Arole. And they first tried to bring doctors and nurses to these villages. They couldn't get anybody to come out there. Then they tried auxiliary nurses, who are women with a high school education and rudimentary training in nursing. They got them into the villages, but unfortunately, no one would listen to them. They did not have credibility because they were too young, because they were from the cities, because they didn't have children of their own, because they, in some ways, were contemptuous of the villagers and their backwards practices. So on one visit to a village, Raj Arole was listening to the mayor talk about the auxiliary nurse there and why she really wasn't working out. And the mayor mentioned that in the next village, there was a woman employed in the government family planning promotion program called Mrs. Joshabai, who was tremendously effective in her work, so much so that her fame had spread to the neighboring areas. And the mayor mentioned that Mrs. Joshabai had only a 4th grade education. Well, this hit Raj Arole like a thunderbolt. It suddenly struck the Aroles that, in fact, lack of education might not be a handicap, it might be an advantage. Mrs. Joshabai had credibility because she knew exactly how her neighbors thought and behaved. Indeed, she was one of them, except now she had happily adopted these new practices that made her family, that had limited her family with family planning. So the Aroles began to choose ordinary villagers, and the more downtrodden the better, to carry these health messages out to their neighbors. And this was in 1970, and the program has thrived ever since. So what useful lesson can we draw from this? First, that a peer is better than an outside authority figure at creating behavior change and transforming social norms. Word of mouth has always been the best form of advertising. The role of the outsider is important to support the peer and boost the peer's authority. Second, the peer demonstration is powerful. The best way to convince me to adopt a new practice is for you to show me that practice, and hopefully you are someone just like me who has made that change. In what you're facing now in your cities, you need more than individual behavior change. Individual behavior change is a 4-ounce solution to a 10-ton problem. You're looking for a larger scale change than that, political change, hopefully. So my third story is about another group of people who accomplished just that. It also takes place in 1998, which seemed to be a great year for this social cure. And it concerns a group of 11 students at Belgrade University in Serbia who met and decided that they were going to overthrow Slobodan Milošević. Now, at that point, Milošević had been the dictator of Serbia for 9 years and had resisted the efforts of many more powerful people to get rid of him, including the combined forces of NATO, and probably had more blood on his hand than anyone in Europe since the death of Joseph Stalin. So these kids seemed like they weren't really in over their heads. They called themselves Otpor, which means resistance in Serbian, and they decided that they did not want to do any of the things that normal political parties do. Otpor did not see its job as giving people information about what a terrible dictatorship they lived under. They figured, if you live here, you already know that. Lack of information wasn't the issue. The issue was motivating people to do something about it. Serbs under Milosevic were fearful and passive. They felt powerless. They thought of themselves as victims. The challenge for Otpor was, how do you overcome this mentality? How do you get people out of their houses and into the street? They decided to try to motivate people by providing them with a new group to join that would allow them to think of themselves not as passive victims, but as daring heroes. Why do people join a cause? Otpor decided to try to get people to join by making their movement the coolest club to belong to. They said no speeches, no marches, no traditional political leadership. Nothing like a traditional political party, no hierarchy at all. Instead, the bread and butter of Otpor was street pranks, street theater, and they adopted the sensibility of a TV show that all the Otpor leaders had grown up watching, and you've probably heard of it. It was called Monty Python's Flying Circus. So, for example, after the NATO bombing ended, Milosevic went around Serbia holding ceremonies to inaugurate the bridges he had rebuilt. Otpor, in one city, built a little toy styrofoam bridge over a pond in a park, and held a ceremony to inaugurate that bridge. They would bring boxes of cookies to police stations and present cookies and flowers to the police with TV cameras in tow over their shoulders. When policemen would form a cordon to block an Otpor action, they would put the young, beautiful women that they had in the front row, and they always had young, beautiful women in the front row, they would whip out paperbacks from their back pocket and begin to read classical literature out loud to the cops. Otpor staged events, for example. They brought box loads of anti-Milosevic materials into their headquarters, and when the police arrested them, very publicly, they'd open the boxes and found they were empty. So these kinds of pranks were very far from politics as usual. Otpor used a system it called the recruit, train, act triangle. You start with a few people. They stage a street action. That street action then attracts spectators, and because it's witty and bold and something different, some of those spectators then will fill out the little forms that the actors pass around saying, are you interested in learning more about Otpor and possibly joining us? So then those people get offered training, and then they join the group performing more street actions. So in this way, Otpor grew. Each day brought many small victories, very modest victories, and that gave Otpor members confidence. Since these street actions were unusual, they also drew a lot of coverage in the opposition to Milosevic's press. So that made the group look bigger than it was, which was also useful. People want to join a group that everyone else is joining. So this is a quote from Vesna Dozet, who is Otpor's Belgrade office manager. You're a kid in the countryside. Your parents are unhappy. They have no work and no money, and they're getting drunk. Then you join Otpor. You're still some kid from nowhere, but now they've given you a cell phone. It's your job to go to the bus station and give a code to the driver to pick up a package of posters from Belgrade. Then you spirit it away and give it to your friends, and they put up the posters during the night. Young people become partisans, capital P. You were never a part of anything, and you feel all of a sudden that you're a part of something. Life under Milosevic was very boring. Otpor allowed people to become their own James Bond. Using pranks and street actions, and coolest black t-shirts, rock music, and great graphic design, Otpor grew. In October of 1998, the group started with 11 members. 2 years later, it had at least 70,000. They actually had lost count because people were arriving so fast they couldn't register them. And Milosevic fell. This was not, of course, Otpor's victory alone, but Otpor provided Serbia with a crucial model of nonviolent discipline. It provided the ground troops of the revolution, and it brought groups into the opposition that previously would have supported the government. Most important, Otpor broke the country's fear. So this is the fall of Milosevic. How is this relevant for you? What was it that Otpor aimed to create in Serbia? It wasn't democracy. Democracy was a byproduct. What it aimed to create was protagonists. It made activists, people who were willing to abandon their couches and their fear and their distaste of politics and get active. Otpor took a van load of people and turned it into a mass movement. Otpor gave people confidence, a sense of efficacy, a group to join, and specific work to do to achieve their goal. Their goal happened to be getting rid of Slobodan Milošević, but it could have been many other things. In fact, the students who organized Otpor then created an organization called CANVAS, which is an acronym for the Center for Nonviolent Actions and Strategies, Center for Applied Nonviolence Actions and Strategies, and they go around the world teaching people Otpor's tactics. They've worked with some 40 different democracy movements, and you may be familiar with their tactics because most recently you saw them in Tahrir Square. Otpor trained the April 6th movement in Egypt, and a lot of what we saw, the unity, the use of humor, the embrace of the police instead of the rejection of the police, these were tactics that came directly from the Serbs. But Otpor's folks also teach their tactics to people who are interested in other goals. They show people how to use these tactics to fight corruption, to do union organizing, and to change environmental rules in their country. So Otpor, of course, is very different than the situation that we're all in. These were kids with a lot of time on their hands, and they were taking on an issue that was really life or death for them. It's always more difficult to organize middle-class professional people who already have jobs and families into action. I'm sure everybody knows that already. But your job isn't to convince people that environmental activism is right. Your job is to convince people who are already on your side to do something about it. And that's a different job. What will motivate people to join? They'll join if it makes them feel good about themselves, feel valuable and useful, and feel that they are part of an important group. So a couple of specific lessons from Otpor. Be the starfish, not the spider. A spider has a central brain. A starfish has a distributed brain. Part of the brain is in each of its 5 fingers. You can cut off the finger and it still has a brain. So Otpor did this. It's often very difficult for leaders to give up control, but that's what is necessary to make people think of the cause as their cause. You give people training and you turn them loose. Otpor had a group of 11 leaders, but nobody knew who these 11 leaders were. The spokespeople for Otpor changed every 2 weeks, and they were mainly teenagers. The more repressive Milošević got and the more panicked, the more he charged Otpor with being terrorists and with plotting to bomb the country and wreak havoc, the more Otpor relied on 17-year-old girls to give its message. So Otpor said to everyone, if you are anti-Milošević and nonviolent, you can do literally anything you want to do and call yourselves Otpor. You are Otpor. We're not going to tell you what to do. Second, motivate people with small wins. Set a really small goal. Achieve it. Next time, set a bigger goal. Confidence is very important. Third, keep it light. Use humor. Fourth, tap young people. Young people are probably going to be more likely to be activists than anyone else. You all have young people in your communities. The issues we're working on are issues that affect young people more than anyone else. Fifth, create a party small p, not a party large p. Otpor decided we're not going to be a traditional political party. Instead, we're going to be the party that everybody wants to come to. People join things because their friends have joined. That is the most effective motivator. Now, obviously, the cases of an anti-government movement in Serbia, a public health movement in India, and a teenage anti-smoking movement in Florida are very different than what you're dealing with. They're not recipes to follow, but they are inspiration. I'm hoping that you will take confidence from the fact that people have succeeded in changing social norms and achieving large-scale political change in much more difficult circumstances than most of us have in the United States. One of their key strategies was offering people a new peer group to join. Otpor and Jamked and the Florida people are your peers. I'm offering their stories in hopes that you will join their club. Good luck.